Today is the 7th day of the October-November 1985 retreat. At first there is an announcement. There's a slight change of schedule. Instead of ending the retreat as we usually do with closing words at 3:45, this will take place at 3:30. This is for the benefit of people who are maybe taking walks, that the closing words will be at 3:30 instead of 3:45. And we'll read today and comment on the teaching of Wang Po. It'll give all of us a change of words. This is a translation by John Blofeld. It is sort of an edited version. Words have been changed or left out. Paragraphs or sentences or parts of sentences omitted. Things that seemed irrelevant to this particular work. Wang Po spoke and taught in the 9th century in China, and his language comes out of a Buddhist context. He uses the word Buddha not just to denote the historical personage of the Buddha, but also the concept of an enlightened being, or the concept of enlightenment, emancipation, freedom, wisdom. The words and sermons and dialogues themselves were written down by one of Wang Po's disciples, who was a government official and a Buddhist scholar. In the introduction, this Pei Su, what is his name, is Pei Su, says the great Zen master lived below the vulture peak on Mount Wang Po, holding in esteem only the intuitive method of the highest vehicle, which cannot be communicated in words. He taught nothing but the doctrine of the one mind, holding that there is nothing else to teach, in that both mind and substance are void, and that the chain of causation is motionless. Mind is like the sun journeying through the sky and emitting glorious light, uncontaminated by the finest particle of dust. To those who have realized the nature of reality, there is nothing old or new, and conceptions of shallowness and depth are meaningless. Those who speak of it do not attempt to explain it, establish no sects, and open no doors or windows. That which is before you is it. Begin to reason about it, and you will at once fall into error. Only when you've understood this will you perceive your oneness with the original Buddha nature. Therefore his words were simple, his reasoning direct, his way of life exalted, and his habits unlike the habits of other men. The first passage says, "The Master said to me, All the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, beside which nothing exists. This mind, which is without beginning, is unborn and indestructible. It is not green nor yellow, and has neither form nor appearance. It does not belong to the categories of things which exist or do not exist, nor can it be thought of in terms of young or old. It is neither long nor short, big nor small, for it transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. It is that which you see before you. Begin to reason about it, and you at once fall into error. It is like the boundless void which cannot be fathomed or measured. The one mind alone is the Buddha, and there is no distinction between the Buddha and sentient beings, but that sentient beings are attached to forms and so seek externally for Buddhahood. By their very seeking, they lose it, for that is using mind to grasp mind. Even though they do their utmost for a full eon, they will not be able to attain it. They do not know that if they put a stop to conceptual thought and forget their anxieties, it will appear before them. For this mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is all living beings. It is not the less for being manifested in ordinary beings, nor is it greater for being manifested in the Buddhas. We had almost a whole talk, or part of a talk, on death, the fear of dying. I'll just read this one brief paragraph by Wang Po on dying, which one may take as either dying at the end of one's life or dying at any one instant. Not physically, but dying to this cherished concept and image of me, mine. He says here, if an ordinary person, when about to die, could only see the 5 elements of consciousness as void, 5 elements of consciousness being form, feeling, thought, sensation, consciousness itself, and all the content of the consciousness as void. The 4 physical elements as not constituting an I, meaning the 4 physical elements is how the ancients considered what makes up this body: fire, earth, water, air, as not constituting an I, being a reality in itself, but to say this is me is something extra. As a matter of speaking, communicating, it's all right. It is helpful in knowing who's talking about whom. But this concept, the image of me, is extra and is the source of all of our pleasures and sorrows. We've talked almost endlessly about it, and it is for each one to see for himself or herself in daily observation. The 4 physical elements as not constituting an I in quotation marks. The real mind as formless and neither coming nor going. What comes and goes are thoughts and images and all the sensations, feelings, emotions hooked up with these thoughts and memories. He says here his real mind as formless and neither coming nor going. Which is this stillness of listening, attending, which is changeless. His nature is something neither commencing at his birth nor perishing at his death, but as whole and motionless in its very depth. His mind and environmental objects as one. No dualism, me and that. Just what's there. Not in terms of how will it serve me or how will it harm me, but to see it as it is, with no one separate, as a seer. That's what he says here, mind and environmental objects as one. If he could really accomplish this, or if this could really take place, because there's no one to accomplish it, there would be enlightenment in a flash. He would no longer be entangled by the triple world, meaning past, present, and future, which is made up by our patterns of thinking. No longer entangled, but understanding of the process, but not entangled by it. The fear of the past, the fear of the future, the hope for the future. All of it. Thought, thinking, and emoting at the same time. He would be without even the faintest tendency toward rebirth. He says here, if he should behold the glorious sight of all the Buddhas coming to welcome him, surrounded by every kind of gorgeous manifestation, he would feel no desire to approach them. If he should behold all sorts of horrific forms surrounding him, he would experience no terror. He would be just himself, oblivious of conceptual thought, and one with the Absolute. This thing of just being oneself. What is that? What does that mean, to be just oneself? Not the idea of oneself being oneself. Just oneself, no attachment to image, past, present, or future. What is oneself when there is no image, no attachment to oneself as seen in the past, present, and future? Then what is oneself? He says he would have attained the state of unconditioned being. All of our images are conditioned. Can that be seen? Without our conditioned habits to want to do something about it, get rid of them, boost them, protect them, defend them, keep them or get rid of them. Here at one place he says, so full understanding can come to you only through an inexpressible mystery. The approach to it is called the gateway of the stillness beyond all activity. If you wish to understand, know that a sudden comprehension comes when the mind is purged of all the clutter of conceptual and discriminatory thought activity. Meaning, all the knowledge we have piled up in our memory banks, in which controls our thought, it distorts our perceptions. Sudden comprehension comes when the mind is purged of all the clutter of conceptual and discriminatory thought activity, which includes the thought, I should purge my mind of all conceptual thought activity. That is a thought. Can one see that? With a seeing that is completely free of judgment. Completely free of opposition or agreement. None of that. Just seeing, listening to a thought arising. Its ways, it's what it promotes, what it triggers, what the consequences of the whole thing are. That seeing, is that cluttered? With shoulds and shouldn'ts? Or is it free of that? Listening or attending, use whatever word. The words are not the actual state of being. If one can use that word, it's not the best word either. He goes on, those who seek the truth by means of intellect and learning only get further and further away from it. Not until your thoughts cease all their branching here and there, not till you abandon all thoughts of seeking for something, will you be on the right road. Then the Pesu asks, at this very moment, all sorts of erroneous thoughts are constantly flowing through our minds. How can you speak of our having none? And Wang Po says, error has no substance. It is entirely the product of your own thinking. If you see that mind is fundamentally without error, whenever thoughts arise, you will realize that they are responsible for errors. If you could still all conceptual movements of thought and still your thinking processes, naturally there would be no error left in you. Therefore it is said, when thoughts arise, then do all things arise. When thoughts vanish, then do all things vanish. Not that the sun and the trees and the wind and the grass vanishes, but our ideas and our likes and dislikes about them. And the questioner continues, at this moment, while erroneous thoughts are arising in my mind, where is the Buddha? Meaning, where is one mind? But it is this, he says, where is the Buddha? And Wang Po says, perhaps you can understand that were you but free of these delusory mental processes, there would then be no Buddha. Why so? Because when you allow a movement of your mind to result in a concept of the Buddha, you are bringing into existence an objective being capable of being enlightened. Similarly, any concept of sentient beings in need of deliverance creates such beings as objects of your thoughts. All intellectual processes and movements of thoughts result from your concepts. If you were to refrain from conceptualizing altogether, where could the Buddha continue to exist? And the questioner persists, at the moment of enlightenment, where is the Buddha? And Wang Po, whence does your question proceed? Whence does your consciousness arise? In other words, where do the thoughts come from? Where does this whole knowledge and consciousness come from? He goes on, when speech is silenced, all mental movements stilled, then the work of deliverance is truly going forward. Then where will you seek the Buddha? You cannot place a head upon your head or lips upon your lips. Rather, you should just refrain from every kind of dualistic distinctions. Hills are hills, water is water. But these mountains, these rivers, the whole world itself, together with sun, moon, and stars, not one of them exists outside of mind. Outside of mind, there is nothing. He says here, the green hills which everywhere meet your gaze, and that void sky that you see glistening above the earth, not a hair's breadth of any of them exists outside of the concepts you have formed for yourself. What about if there's no concept of hill and mountain, river, tree, sky? How does one see the sky and the river and the hill? How does one listen to the wind? Is that a concept? Is it the brain scanning to find a word for these sounds? And if it finds a word for these sounds, is that what is heard? Listen. If there's no thought, can one say it came and it went? He says here, so it is that every single sight and sound is the eye of wisdom. You may talk the whole day through, yet what has been said? You may listen from dawn till dusk, but what will you have heard? Pei-Su goes on, assuming all this is so, what particular state is connoted by the word bodhi? Bodhi means enlightenment or supreme wisdom, a Sanskrit word. And Huang Po says, Bodhi is no state. The Buddha did not attain to it, sentient beings do not lack it. It cannot be reached with a body nor sought with a mind. And the next question, but how does one attain to the Bodhi mind? Bodhi is not something to be attained. Wisdom, understanding, clarity, truth, whatever word. If at this very moment, says Huang Po, you could convince yourselves of its unattainability, being certain indeed that nothing at all can ever be attained, you would already be Bodhi-minded. This does not mean the psychological state of resignation or despair or giving up, because then one just thinks one can't attain it. it is not doing. Discouragement, resignation is also doing something. Habitual thoughts, imprinted early in the mind. Since Bodhi is not a state, it is nothing for you to attain. And therefore it is written of the Buddha, there was not a grain of anything attained by me. You may recently have heard others talking about this attaining of the Bodhi mind, but this may be called an intellectual way of driving the Buddha away. By following this method, you only appear to achieve Buddhahood. Seeking outside for a Buddha possessed of form has nothing to do with you. Later he says, in reality, truth is neither preached in words nor otherwise signified, and those who listen neither hear nor attain. It is as though an imaginary teacher had preached to imaginary people. As regards all these teachings, if for the sake of the way I speak to you from my deeper understanding, you will certainly be able to understand what I say. And as to mercy and compassion, if for your sakes I take to thinking things out and studying other people's concepts, in neither case will you have reached a true perception of the real nature of your own mind from within yourselves. And Pei Su says, what is the meaning of zealous application? And Wang Po says, the most completely successful form of zealous application is the absence from your minds of all such distinctions as my body or my mind. We talk so often about this. Something comes up, a thought and emotion of jealousy. When one becomes aware of it, I shouldn't be like that because I am not like that. One has an image of what my mind or my personality is like, an identity with an image, and one disidentifies with what comes up. But if a kind emotion comes up, then one is not so hasty in disavowing. Then this is my compassion. That's why it's so hard to look, because of this constant immediate identifying or disavowing. If one could only notice that and then abstain from it, then it is so much easier to observe the functioning of this human mind. Which is functioning very similarly in billions of human brains the world all over. The question, how then does a man accomplish this comprehension of his own mind? And Wang Po, that which asked the question is your own mind. But if you were to remain quiescent and refrain from the smallest mental activity, its substance would be seen as a void, you would find it formless, occupying no point in space, and falling neither into the category of existence or into that of non-existence. This abstaining from mental activity is not the control and suppression of thoughts, but seeing and understanding this whole process of seeking and escaping. I'll just pick those two. And if one really becomes aware of this whole mental and physical motion of seeking, just seeing it, listening to it, being aware of it in its minutest detail, it abates. Or it may abate. If the pleasure of seeking is so overriding as an activity, one will not want to look at it in minute detail. One will rather ride on the wave of the pleasure and then complain about the trough of depression later. And then, instead of just looking at the depression in its minutest detail, not analyzing it, just being that, not repressing or resisting any aspect of it, no matter how painful it feels, how miserable one feels, then there's no need for escape. And then depression is no longer depression. It changes. It actually seems to become the very energy of attention. At one point he says, there is no self and no other. There is no wrong desire, no anger, it's all in quotation marks, no hatred, no like, no dislike, no victory, no failure. This is how we constantly label ourselves and our states. And then the label, with all its previous associations, becomes important and not what's actually going on. The label veils what is actually going on, because it's already associated with our memories of what this thing is, this pain or this sadness, what it reminds me of. But this sadness, this moment is something new. It's not what it reminds me of. What is it if it doesn't remind me of anything? If I don't know it. If I really don't know it. If I come to it, as it were, completely defenseless and completely vulnerable. Innocent of all my previous experiences and the knowledge I've retained about it. Then what is sadness, which I will not call that way any longer at this instant? also watching carefully whether I see myself as a victim of this sadness, a sufferer of it, and whether there is in fact attachment to the image of being a sufferer, a victim. And if there is attachment to this image, then there is a kind of pleasure in suffering, because it gives me an existence as something, somebody. Do you see that? He says, only renounce the error of intellectual or conceptual thought processes, and your nature will exhibit its pristine purity. Unless you understand this, the whole of your great learning, your painful efforts to advance, your austerities of diet and clothing will not help you to a knowledge of your own mind, or an understanding, he means, of your own mind. All such practices must be termed fallacious. What end is served by pursuits like those? Later on he says, as it is, so long as your mind is subject to the slightest movement of thought, you will remain engulfed in the error of taking ignorant and enlightened for separate states. This error will persist regardless of your vast knowledge of the scriptures or your ability to pass through the 4 grades of sainthood, the 10 stages of progress leading to enlightenment, etc. For all these pursuits belong to what is ephemeral. Even the most strenuous of your efforts is doomed to fail, just as an arrow shot ever so high into the air must inevitably fall, spent to the ground. Yeah, unenlightened and enlightened are images, aren't they? If I conceive of an enlightened state, then I must classify myself, which is already the epitome of division and separation. Traps. He says here, were you now to keep your minds motionless, whether walking, standing, sitting, or lying? Motionless, meaning this motionless attending without a purpose, or listening, looking, or nothing. The energy just gathering in no direction whatsoever. Just being there. No duality, no reliance on others, and no attachments. Just allowing all things to take their course the whole day long, as though you were too ill to bother. Unknown to the world, innocent of any urge to be known, or unknown to others. Then truth would penetrate your understanding through and through. In a little while you would find yourselves firmly unattached. I wonder whether in hearing this, some anxiety ripples up about this state of being firmly unattached. because we've thought all our life that the meaning of our life lies in our attachments. No attachment does not mean no love. On the contrary, attachment prevents love. It tries to avoid facing fear of being alone, or it's trying to fill the inner emptiness without facing that emptiness freely. For the first time in your lives, he continues, you would discover your reactions to phenomena decreasing. We talked about that yesterday. Somebody had asked about, is it ever possible not to immediately react to a phenomenon? We want that ability not to react. But how are we keeping our minds all day long? This sounds very dualistic. I'm keeping my mind this way. What is going on in this body-mind from moment to moment is a better question. At the very end of this book, there's this question. But how can we prevent ourselves from falling into the error of making distinctions between this and that, self and other, good and bad, right and wrong? And Wang Po says, by realizing that though you eat the whole day through, no single grain has passed your lips, and that the day's journey has not taken you a single step forward. Also, by uniformly abstaining from such notions as self and other, do not permit the events of your daily lives to bind you, but never withdraw yourselves from them. Avoid the error of thinking in terms of past, present, and future. The past has gone, the present is a fleeting moment, and the future has not yet come. When you practice, it says here, mind control. I don't know what that is. It's Wang Po's, Blofeld's translation. When you sit, let's put it that way, sit in the proper position, which includes chairs. Stay perfectly tranquil and do not permit the least movement of your minds to disturb you. This alone is what is called liberation. Be diligent, be diligent. We will end here for today.